Hi there, welcome to another video of the Confrontier. Glad you're watching. Today we'll be talking about men versus boys. That sounds a bit weird perhaps, but what I mean by that is the difference between being an actual man and being merely a boy. Of course, normally speaking, we would say an adult male person is a man, whereas a young one is a boy. But what I'm talking about here is the mental aspect of that. You can be very certain about this. There are boys who mentally amount to men because of things they've experienced and learned. There are also quite a few actually, men who are physically adult but mentally still boys. And in fact, I'd say that there are far too many of them. But I'll elaborate on what I mean by that, starting from now. Let me first mention neoteny. Neoteny is a biological concept that involves organisms growing into adulthood in the sense of being able to reproduce while not actually having all characteristics of a normal adult of its species or its type of organism. So for example, a well-known example are axolotls, salamanders that grow into adults that still display a lot of their larval characteristics, but are nevertheless able to reproduce. Neoteny has also been implicated in the physical and mental characteristics that we see in domesticated animals. The idea being this, the more placid, you could say more childish individuals were the ones that were generally selected for by humans, selected for reproduction and for being able to live in cohabitation with humans in general. And this has also resulted in inadvertently selecting for neotenic characteristics, so childish physical characteristics. It's very well described in dogs especially, but also in pigs and in other creatures. So basically you're looking at things like behaving like a puppy or a piglet, or having a shorter face, having floppy ears, all sorts of characteristics that fit a juvenile of the same or related species more than the adult. But nevertheless, these adults are fully capable of reproducing. It has also been related to what humans look like compared to our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, and if you want to cast the net a bit further, other apes. In that, I won't delve into the details too much because I don't have time for that, but look it up if you want to. In that, humans look more like infant chimpanzees or gorillas in terms of our proportions of our body and so on, than we do resemble the adults of those species. So now you've got an idea of what neoteny is all about. There's plenty of material you could read about it and watch, presumably, if you want to. So go ahead and look it up if you are so inclined. Now, what I think is that humans in general are probably neotenic up to some extent. And also that that also means that adulthood is something we, of course, reach, but that not just the physical, but also the mental aspect of that is something that is not necessarily the same in every individual. And the mental aspect can in fact be selected for by society to quite some extent. I'll delve into that by having a look at what I think are characteristics of quite a few men in general. I'd like to start off with a quotation that I came across in a comic book once, which I actually think holds a lot of truth. Namely, it's this one. It's probably not original to the comic. What separates men from boys is the size of their toys. The meaning of this is pretty clear, I'd say, namely that men generally also like having toys and having things to play with, but that generally the toys they have and that they want and that they desire are rather more impressive and bigger than the ones that boys have. This is probably more to do with them being able to get those bigger toys rather than a matter of preference, because I'm sure that lots of boys would also like to have big toys like big cars and machines and what else you might think of, but it's not generally within their reach. And personally, speaking of myself, I have very, very little desire for such toys in general. I don't care about cars, I don't care about machines. There are lots of other flashy, bouncy, loud, bangy, whatever things that I just don't care about. And I might be rare in this, I might not be, but my general impression is that there are very many men, perhaps the majority, who are quite a bit into these things. And I personally think that it's one of those things that displays a lack of, well, mental growth, emotional growth, really. Because when you are still so in search of toys and so in need of such flashy things in order to make yourself feel happy, I think it's something that is closer to a childish, immature, infantile mindset than that of a responsible adult. Though, of course, everyone contains multitudes, so one person can be very adult in one way and very immature in others. It's neoteny, you could say, even though I'm stretching the definition of that term probably a bit too much, but still, I think it's a useful term to use here. Of course, in and of itself, wanting toys of whatever size or shape is not a very bad or harmful habit. So if you are a boy or man watching this and you think, well, I just like collecting toy animals or collecting toy buses or whatever it might be, by all means go ahead. I think that's pretty innocent and pretty charming in its own way, even if it's not my type of thing. However, when we're looking at things that are actually in one way or another harmful to the people in your surroundings, or at least a nuisance to people in your surroundings, I think you are looking at a problem. So think of those men who absolutely need to drive cars that make lots and lots of noise. You're just being obnoxious, you're being harmful, you're being a nuisance. Think of people who insist on driving cars that are especially bad for the environment. You're just being harmful here for no personal gain, really, at least not a tangible, worthwhile gain, in my view. While you are impressing negative aspects upon your surroundings and upon other people that live where you live. Same goes for men, because it's mostly men, who insist on having loud music on when they go in public spaces, or other ways in which people want to let others inadvertently perhaps suffer from their presence. You could also think of things like leaving your litter everywhere, or insisting on eating meat every day in large quantities, or smoking in public spaces, and so on. All of these things are very harmful, but they're also childish characteristics of a person who, I think at least, has not got a mature mind. Because when you're mature, you know that you are a responsible person, and that you bear responsibility for your surroundings and for others, and that you should take other people's needs into account. I've delved into this before in other videos, and I'm sure I will continue to do so, because it might be one of the vital things I want to teach you, namely being responsible and being a person that can be relied upon by others and that actually contributes to his or her surroundings. Now think of things that you would consider childish behaviors. I'll name a few, like only caring about yourself, wanting things without really thinking that through, obtaining things and then losing interest in them, insisting on being the most important person around. All sorts of things that are excusable in little children who usually do not have the mindset or do not have the brains yet to know that they can't behave like that. But when you look for it, or at least just have your eyes open for it, you'll realize that there are plenty of adults, and I'm afraid most of them are men, who display those characteristics too. Think of things like mansplaining, the need to ask for consent. Also, both of those, as well as others, are all to do with men generally insisting that their own needs and their own feelings are more important than those of others. And I think it also feeds a lot into political discourse. When I say political discourse, I also mean the political arena and elections in general. So, for example, in the Netherlands, there has been a rather shocking development in that one of our most extremely right politicians has actually managed to get the most votes out of all our politicians. So apparently lots of people were quite attracted to the way he presented himself and attracted to the way that he talked about others. And not wanting to start a political discussion here, but I think most of this can be summarized as just me, and I don't want to care or feel about others. I just want to live my own life and do what I want. And I think this is really the essence of the childish, immature mindset, the boy, if you so want, because it's the behavior of a child. And perhaps in this case, since we're talking about men mostly, just a boy, to insist that he is the only person that matters and that he should get his toys, that he should get the food he wants, that he should get the entertainment he wants, and that others should not be considered at all in this. Of course, I'm generalizing and exaggerating here, but I do think it boils down to this. And I wouldn't be surprised if the actual number of immature men has somewhat risen in recent decades, because it's something that is encouraged by commerce. It's also encouraged by politics in general, because these are the types of people that can be motivated to vote against other people's interests. And in the end, I think their own interest too, by appealing to their childish mindset. And therefore, politicians who thrive on that sort of sentiment, so I'm mostly looking at populistic politicians here, actually benefit from having a lot of people like that around, because it feeds into their power base. It is their power base to have people who only care about themselves, or at least only about their most immediate surroundings, and who feel threatened by the very fact that another person might be in need of your responsibility, about your restraint, and so on. So restraint is also something that is, in my view, one of the clearest signs of an adult mental capacity. When you're an adult, you can restrain yourself, both for the short term, but also for the long term. And you know that your own desires and your own needs and your own wants are not the be-all and end-all of life. and not even of your life itself. When I say you need to have restraint in order to be a mature person, I don't mean to say you need to repress your emotions, not at all, because actually allowing yourself to express emotions when necessary is also a sign of maturity. It's also a matter of knowing how to deal with them and why and when. So, for example, if you want to feel angry about some slight and actually show that anger, I'd say that's a sign of immaturity. But if you actually allow yourself to be touched and or even cry about truly serious matters and about things that do not just involve yourself, I think it's a sign of maturity. And allowing yourself to have emotions where they matter and where they are needed is also a sign of maturity. I would put it like this: real men cry but don't throw tantrums, and tantrum throwing is, as I said before, more or less a very immature characteristic, because it means that you throw your emotions around unrestrained and only to the benefit of yourself, and probably not in a constructive way either. So keep this in mind. Real men cry but don't throw tantrums. I don't think there's anything innocent about what you could call men children. So a man child meaning an adult, grown-up person who is mentally childlike, or even more than childlike, just childish in general, because it's this kind of egotistic attitude, which it can perhaps only be, that also hurts and at least affects others. So keep in mind that the person who is childish in mind is a person who only thinks of themselves, is a person who shows little restraint, is a person who is mostly concerned with, you could say, unimportant things, mostly concerned with externalities, mostly concerned with self gratification. And when we put that together, we're looking at people who at least have the capacity to be a danger, or at the very best a nuisance to others. Imagine a person like this being in a relationship. If you only care about yourself, you will not be able to be a responsible or admirable partner, or at least not to the extent you should be. As I said before, people contain multitudes. Very few people will be immature in every way, and likewise, very few people will be positive or entirely negative influences on the lives of the people surrounding them. But when you have such characteristics in a person, that is a clear sign of there being considerable hazards. And relationships I use in a broad sense here. So I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, and about professional relationships too. Because people who are immature take their immaturity everywhere, even if it might not show in the exact amount, in the exact same amount everywhere or at any time. I'd go as far as saying that restraint and responsibility mark the adult. So a person who doesn't show these characteristics, or at least not to a very noticeable or considerable extent, is someone who is not adult, so not mature yet. Now, the good news is that people can grow into that responsibility, and can grow into that adulthood. But alas, lots of people take far too much time to do so, and some might actually never reach that stage, no matter how old they get, because they are just unwilling or incapable of achieving that level of maturity. In a sense, you could say that such persons have not raised themselves, or have not been raised, but were actually pulled down, or at least kept on the same level, whereas they should have grown or been made to grow. If you listen to this and realize that those characteristics apply to you, there are two options. One of them is that you are absolutely right in this, and hopefully now realize that you'll have work to do, that you'll have to grow more responsibility and more restraint. And in that case, my positive message is that with willpower, you can get very far indeed. The other option is that you think, well, I think these characteristics apply to me, but I certainly don't agree with the message. Well, in that case, I can be I can be very clear and very plain and sane, as I always attempt to be. You've got growing up to do. I've said this in other videos. You need to see yourself as a work in progress. You can be a much better person than you already are, but getting there does not just involve time, it also involves working on it. And of course, you can also have experiences that will allow you to grow up, though generally those are not very positive or very pleasant experiences, otherwise they wouldn't affect your personality so much. I've touched before on the fact that politicians can benefit from this immature mindset, and that also applies to commerce, because well, if you are attempting to sell something to people, you will probably be more successful in selling things to people who show little restraint and who have childish needs than by wanting to appeal to people who lack those characteristics or have grown beyond them, as the case probably is. So there is, in our very commercial society, our very capitalistic society, a tendency, I think, to not let people grow up, especially men, so that they can be made money of more than they could be made money of otherwise. So keep that in mind when you notice how there are so many things that are being sold generally at too high prices that are mostly of the flash bang variety and not so much of the actually useful and long-lasting variety. So it's very beneficial to businesses and to other commercial actors to appeal to people's immaturity and to actually restrain their growth. So keep that in mind when you're considering buying things like cars, fireworks, t-shirts, drinks, all sorts of food stuff, and so on. You're being tempted the entire time. And when you have little restraint, and when you are still in the childish mindset, you have very few defenses against this, and you're setting yourself up to be a victim of these commercial interests. So if you insist on not growing up because you feel it would be boring, or it would be unpopular or whatever, keep in mind that you're also setting yourself up to not just be a lousy adult, but also to be a puppet of all sorts of commercial as well as political forces. Speaking of commercials and politics, I'd say the difference between these things might sometimes be very little indeed, because basically political campaigns are also commercials in a different form and shape and to a perhaps different goal, but the characteristics are the same, and they might actually be growing more similar as we continue in this so-called progress of civilization. When you're a childish person, you are also a very easy victim for commerce. So I'd say figurative babies also make figurative suckers, because basically when you keep buying things that you do not need and you insist on following a certain product or replacing it entirely with the newest model or whatever, you are a sucker. You are a sucker for the person that actually sells these things and profits of you. And if I know my childish individuals as well as I think I do, that is something that they generally hate. They want to be taken seriously. They want their needs to be important, and I suppose it's not in their best needs at all to be a sucker. The ideal customer, and this is not something I've made up myself, but which I heard a Belgian comedian say once, is a person who is both rich in money and rich in stupidity. And stupidity and immaturity are not the same, of course, but they tend to overlap to quite an extent. The fictional character I'm reminded of is Mr. Toad from The Wind in the Willows. Now, for people who don't know who I'm talking about, Mr. Toad is an actual toad who is plenty rich, but is very much lacking in sense. And he's very much driven by his whims. So, for example, in the course of the story of The Wind and the Willows, he grows a fanatical obsession with cars, then with trains, and in the end with airplanes. And all of those obsessions he can feed into, he can actually feed, because he has plenty of money. Mr. Toad is basically this. He's a rich dumb fuck without restraint, and who has plenty of money and a distinct lack of sense, and who is easily interested by things that take his fancy and which tend to be loud, big, and, well, expensive. And he wants to buy them and drive them and fly them, as the case may be. And these decisions, in every case, lead to disaster, or at least into major problems. And I think Mr. Toad is unintentionally, because I don't think the author of The Wind in the Willows meant him to be this, is a pretty good analogy for immature individuals that nevertheless have the money to burn. And in a smaller sense, every person who has money to spend is, in the eyes of a business or someone that wants to sell something, someone who's got money to burn, meaning that they've got money that can be taken from them by appealing to their childish nature. Now, you do not want to be Mr. Toad. So what ought to be the takeaways from this video? First of all, realize that lots of people, and especially men, are grown-ups that have not mentally grown up. Then, realize that in many cases this is not something that can be considered innocent. These are the type of people who hurt, or at least menace, or obstruct others for their personal benefit without realizing that they're actually doing it in cases, but mostly because they feel their own needs and their own feelings are more important than those of others. Then, if you realize that you are the type of person I'm describing by this, don't get mad. Realize that you can do things about this, that you can actually be that adult you should be, and that you are a work in progress and should see yourself as just that and take action upon it. If you are a person like that, it's also good to realize that you are probably being exploited by commercial interests, because you are the type of person they love to take advantage of financially. Also realize that when you have an immature person like that, an emotionally neotenic person, you could say, you are probably also an easy victim for politicians. And most importantly of all, realize that you do not want to be a person like that, and that it is in the best interests of yourself, but also, and perhaps especially, the people in your surroundings, that you grow out of it. You might well have thought that my video today, and my message especially, was a bit more assertive than in the videos you saw before, and I suppose you might be right in this, because it's something I feel much about. I feel that immature people, immature adults, are a problem. And I think we can basically, as a society, not afford to have too many of them. And I really want to emphasize that if you are a person like that right now, it's in everyone's interest that you grow out of it. So that concludes my video. If you feel like sharing this video and message, go ahead. And of course, if you want to subscribe to my channel, go ahead. See you next time. Bye.